Grazie mille, Brecht de Klerk, che naturalmente non ha bisogno di presentazioni per questo pubblico. The keynote speech we're about to hear is given by Tom de Smet, Director of Archives of the Netherlands. Today we'll speak about the importance of archives in democracy, and we are looking forward to hearing also your comments and questions after his keynote speech. Thank you. You have the floor, Tom.
Prima di tutto grazie mille per avermi invitato, è veramente un onore perché posso cominciare questa conferenza. And now I will no longer speak Italian. So I won't be needing the AI help today. It was actually funny because I noticed we have a white sneaker club today. I think pretty much everyone who came up stage is wearing white sneakers. I think that's also almost reason for applause, but let's talk about democracy. Let's design. This is a very pretentious title, I hear you think, but I hope to be able to convince you why it's not as pretentious as maybe we think it is. First of all, I'm no stranger to this community. I was working at Sound and Vision for a long time, and in 2019 I stepped to the dark side. First, the museum world, not as dark, but then in 2021, the even darker side, the state archives, the National Archives, where currently I'm the National Director of the National Archive in the Netherlands. It's a two-management direction, it's a two-people management archive, and I'll come to that later. Just to gauge the audience a little bit here, who doesn't work at an archive, first of all? Okay. Who works at an archive that's publicly funded? Okay, quite a few. And who has worked or still works at a national library or a national archive or a state archive? A few, okay. That gives me an idea. Good to know. And I said I moved on to the dark side, but I'm not an archivist myself. I'm not a librarian. I'm actually a neuropsychologist who ended up in the world of archives. And how did that come about? Why am I still in the archives? I mean, I have lots of interests. I could have explored so many different things. And this is the answer, why I still work in archives. On January 22, in 2017, a certain Kellyanne Conway, not sure if you're familiar with her, she was for a long time spokesperson of Donald Trump, coined the term alternative facts. What you see here is the inauguration, in a very blurry picture. I wasn't aware the screen was going to be so big. In a very blurry picture, the amount of people at the inauguration of Barack Obama and the inauguration, the number of people attending the inauguration of Trump. Trump said no one had ever received as many people as he did. When confronted with this photo, Kellyanne Conway said that Donald Trump had just stated an alternative fact. And this is 2017, a year after we had been bombarded by misinformation. We seem to live in a post-truth society where facts didn't matter, science was, just an opinion. And then in 2017, alternative facts came into play. So that's the point I actually said no. At the time, I was the head of the archive at Sound and Vision, and I thought, no, what we are doing is actually very valuable. We have to protect these sources. The authenticity of sources is more important than ever. So thank you, Kellyanne Conway. So back to the institution where I work now, the Dutch context. The National Archive is an independent government agency. It's part of the Ministry of Culture, Education and Science. And we are subject to the Public Records Act, which is also the leverage that we have in the story that I'll be telling you later. As such, we have a system responsibility for all archives in the Netherlands, and that I mean government archives. Most of the things that I will be saying today, that's just a little side note, are about government archives. but I want you to think and reflect about how that can actually translate to the work that you do in audiovisual archives, because I know it can, because I was there, I worked there. The current situation is the ministries and other governmental organizations, cabinets, are responsible for their own information management and governance. And after 10 to 20 years, all the stuff comes to the National Archives. I call it stuff, no offense. I didn't mean to say that, but I did. Anyway, and we take a very passive, almost a very reactive approach to publishing material, activities, organized activities, public outreach activities. In that sense, we can learn a lot from audiovisual archives. But that's where we are now. So that's a little bit of context of who I am, where I work, and what I bring to the table. And as a very modern archivist, I printed all my sheets because I changed the notes last night, and I can't really follow them here. So if they fall on the stage, let it just be part of the show. But back to this year's topic, algorithms. They're everywhere. And, well, it's quite easy. We're going to be blaming all algorithms for the next 4 days. So, hey, why not join in? Because it's easy to blame them. I mean, they're everywhere, like Brecht said. But on one hand, I mean, a lot of people are actually quite happy they are there because they make our lives easier. I mean, they tell us what to watch. You know, I have a 97% match with, I don't know, the Barbie movie, so I watch it. You know, I just follow the algorithms. They tell me what to watch, what I should like, what I need to do next, where my Uber is, where I can find the menu, the telephone numbers. It makes our life so much easier. I mean, something else is connecting the dots for us. So why would we be blaming them? Of course, the level of intrusion in your private life sometimes, you know, you don't want to be constantly reminded that Uber has a taxi waiting for you in a place where you don't need it. I mean, that's of course something that we're not waiting for, but the level of intrusion is there, but it offers so many benefits. But there's also a huge downside to algorithms. And that takes me to a thing that happened in the Netherlands, and we call it, well, in Dutch it's called the kindertoeslagenaffaire, but as that no one in this room, apart from the Dutchies, can actually pronounce that, we'll call it the childcare benefits gate. And it's a chilling example of how data, algorithm, and people can shape a toxic mess that caused real damage to thousands of Dutch citizens. We go back a while, a bit of history about this, because it's quite pivotal in my story. On a probably sunny day or not so sunny day, I mean, after all, this is the Netherlands, it was decided that the tax services should not only collect taxes, but also hand out benefits, just like, for example, childcare benefits. So a plan was made, a system was created. Of course, fraud was a concern, but people, you know, in general, the claimants were trustworthy. People actually trusted them and went on. In 2005, the political wind sort of changed, and you know, we had to become tough on fraud. I mean, you know, the money that we were giving out as government could be abused. And in 2013, shit hit the fan, as it was discovered that criminals asked citizens from Bulgaria, so who were not residing in the Netherlands, to make fake addresses, bank accounts, and so on, to claim benefits, and of course the criminals kept most of the money, and the people who made the claims only got a little bit. The junior minister at the time, had to resign. So, I mean, it was awful, because the idea of letting the tax services collect money, and you know, it's probably more reassuring to us than letting them give out money. So basically, they messed up, and so what they did was, there was a lot of political pressure to tackle the fraud that was discovered in 2013. So what they did is, okay, we need to tackle the fraud through combining data. You know, because data is it's reliable, it's justifiable, it's without bias. Well, not really, if one of the variables in the algorithm were the postcodes where people lived. I mean, how unbiased is that? And we thought it was free of judgment, so it was a safe approach to actually do that. Well, the data definitely did their job. I mean, the system identified tens of thousands of people who were unjustly tagged as swindlers, criminals, because the algorithm found them and they were put on a blacklist. The tax services started to demand payback of all the benefits that they had received, which sometimes was into tens thousands of euros that those people simply didn't have. So reports of families going completely bankrupt, losing their jobs, losing their homes, losing marriage, and sometimes even children, that actually happened. And not just to a few families, we're talking more than 50,000 families. I mean, there were, of course, reports from society saying, hey, this is happening, we cannot allow this to happen. But those pleas were ignored. And you could ask, why were they ignored? Because what was happening, unfolding, was so much worse than the actual embezzlement. The fraud amounted to a couple of millions of euros. And the damage that was being done was so much greater. All that because of what? Because in hindsight, well, how did this happen? And actual reports have shown it happened because we had a coronation. I think, what the hell does a coronation have to do with this algorithm? Well, it was specifically in that weekend, because of course it was a bank holiday weekend, the Dutch had days off. So a group of civil servants with a couple of consultants from one of the big four companies thought it was a perfect day to cobble together a system and give it a little update to just get rid of some errors. And their goal was to trace the imperfections in that system and to fix those. Well, the fixes never happened, but the data that they gathered about the imperfections was used as evidence for fraud. So you see how this is going wrong? I mean, it's awful if you think of it. So it was never meant, as far as we know, that intervention was never meant to develop a foolproof and infallible system to detect fraud. No. But the memo of the people using the algorithm, that memo never got to those people. So there's now a huge Dutch parliament is currently conducting a parliamentary inquiry into this scandal. The government toppled over this, not for the current elections, the one before that. They seem to topple quite easily in the Netherlands these days. And the final report and the conclusions are expected in somewhere mid next year. Even that is taking quite long for people who are waiting for answers. Just to show you, so who or what shall we blame? Because the fallout of this scandal is humongous. I mean, first of all, the incredible damage done to so many citizens in the Netherlands who have lost pretty much everything and who were on blacklists and they had no idea why they were criminals. They couldn't get jobs because they couldn't get certain papers because they were criminals. It was awful. Of course, also the enormous damage done to the credibility of government. How can a government who should be taking care of its people allow something like that to happen? And also the costs for society, not only psychological, but also, just costs, because the paybacks are huge for the compensation and the righting of the wrongs is huge. So, but who and what shall we blame? I mean, we always want to blame something. Was it the algorithm? I mean, that was definitely a critical element because it showed that the data that was produced by the algorithm is basically what detected the fraud that never, in many cases, wasn't there. Or should we indeed be blaming the people who designed it? I mean, the data in itself was correct, but the connections and the context messed up the key elements of causality and correlation. And in the end of the day, that's the work of people. And I mean, yeah, it's something that we very often say in archiving. Well, I say it. It's, you know, garbage in, garbage out. And here, maybe the algorithm was garbage. Today it wasn't garbage that much. It wasn't as much garbage. But we did get garbage out. And so far we have the parliamentary inquest that I was talking about earlier has sort of made a few things clear. I'll quickly point them out to you. And I think most of them you'll figure. Well, it was clear that in this whole scenario, the citizens came in second place. The system was put in first place. The political and societal pressure to show no mercy for fraudsters was an important driver for the actions of the tax service. Also, what became so clear is that all governmental agencies that were actually working with citizens were completely void of empathy. It was not their execution to help citizens. There was zero empathy in that, in everything that happened. And nobody who had the power to do something about the processes, about, you know, the data about the things that were done with the data from the algorithm were meant to fix the mistakes. I mean, no one got the memo that those fixes were just there to find imperfections, not detect fraud. And then worst of all, during this whole, I mean, this happened for years. You have to, between 2013 and 2020. For 7 years, these people were thrown into a black hole. They had no idea what was going on, and they couldn't get access to files, documents. It was awful. They couldn't, does the computer says no when I'm asking for this file? Why can't I get a certificate of good behavior? Like, it was impossible to get it because of it. They were blacklisted. And they couldn't look at their files, and in most cases, those people still can't access their full files or actually see them. So these are some of the, so what happened? Of course, that's what I love about the Netherlands. We're gonna fix everything in a big operation. So the government set up, because of this, in 2020, end of 2020, beginning of 2021, 2 major programs with more or less the same purpose. So to restore trust of society in a just government, a government that is essential in your belief in democracy. I mean, government is represented by a cabinet that's, you know, elected by citizens. So they said, okay, we're going to spend 800 million euros for this huge operation to improve the information governance so that citizens, journalists, researchers can have access to crucial information about themselves and society. The information had to be made accessible in a way that governments can be held accountable, and because being able to reiterate the decision process from a very early stage, but at the same time, civil servants should also be able to do their work because they use that information a lot to hand out taxes, benefits, to claim fines, and so on. So the government is using a lot of, so they say, okay, we set aside 800 million in the next 5 years to do this. And 17.5 million was allotted to the National Archives. Wait, hold on, what? 17.5 million allotted to the National Archives to spend in 5 years, and apparently we're getting 3.5 million every year after that. But what the hell? What can archives do to restore trust in government? Is that even our job? Well, comes in the modern archive. You know, the institution I work in, I put in modern between brackets because it's not always what we think of. I mean, we have 145 kilometers of paper, 300,000 of beautiful old maps, 15 million pictures, and it's easy to forget that the biggest game changer in our business, digital information, is actually a huge chunk in what national archives, state archives do. I'm actually proud to say that, well, I think in September this year, we will reach the threshold of 50% of our employees have IT-related jobs. That's more than 225 IT-related jobs in the archives, in the state archives. So we're far away from the times that we were just, people asked me yesterday, oh, do you digitize books? We don't even have books. Libraries have books. We hold public records. So, but still, I mean, okay, great. But would you still really look at an archive to restore trust in government and improve the information management and governance within huge organizations like state departments, cabinets, local authorities, and so on? Well, hell no. Okay, it's going to be a very short keynote. No offense, because let's be honest, currently the records management community in government is failing to deliver on the public values that we hold so dear. And I'll just name a few. We're falling short on, providing trustworthy or complete information. It's simply not available for decision-making most of the time. That's not only the fault of archives. As I said, most of the information governance is within cabinets and ministries. The lack of transparency, because of information is difficult to find, declines the trust in public institutions. Also, the economic potential of open data and the reuse of public sector information cannot be fulfilled. Sometimes because they don't want to, but most of the times because data is simply unavailable, the quality is compromised, and we have incomplete descriptions of our data models in the data sets, or no descriptions at all, because we don't think it's our business. And then information with cultural and historical research value created in unmanaged information systems, happening all the time, is in danger of being lost forever. I'm not telling you anything new, and I don't want to be the party pooper at this early stage in the conference. So, because it's not all doom and gloom, this is The Hague, the skyline of The Hague, the capital, the administrative capital of the Netherlands. So that's not Amsterdam. That's also where the National Archives are based, right in between these towers somewhere, dwarfed by the towers, by the way. So I'll ask the question again, because I don't want to be the party pooper. Comes in the modern archive, so I repeat, should we look at the archive to restore trust in government? And the answer should be? Oh, still hell no, okay. Hell yes, because the purpose of government archives has always been about transparency. We just seem to have forgotten about it. In most mission statements of state archives and national archives, it says, we should ensure citizens' rights to get access to public information. And that's also the case. I mean, the public records law, under which we all work as government archives, decrees it. We have no choice. And if you think of it, the right to public information, to information at all times for all citizens, is pivotal for a trusted and transparent government. I mean, I would even go as far as saying that it's actually a fundamental contribution to democracy in the same way that free press is. So in that sense, you could actually think of archives as a cornerstone of democracies. And I'm not the first person who tells you that. But do we believe it? Do we act upon it? That's something that I wonder. And this brings me back to this, because that's why I chose to apply for this role at the National Archives. I told you already why I stayed in archives, why I love archives so much. But, I mean, we have to start believing that we can actually make a difference in huge societal tasks like restoring trust in government. It doesn't always mean that you support the government or the politics of the government, but I think we all acknowledge that having a healthy government, a good functioning government, is really an important key to democracy, to a stable democracy. And if governments can't explain how decisions were made because they don't have the information to reconstruct the decision-making process, then governments fail. And as archives, I do feel it's our obligation to step in. So that's why I coined, let's be your partner in transparency. And I think it's a beautiful term, because it means it's something that we have to do together. It's not something that archives can do all by themselves. We definitely need. And government archives, they can come to the rescue. They're often seen as beacons of reliable sources and information. Well, a small sidestep, government archives are definitely not always beacons of reliable information. We hold a lot of awful information that's not reliable, that's extremely biased. Think of the colonial archives in the Netherlands. There is such an extreme bias by the white colonizers that they thought they had reliable information on freights in ships, and those numbers turned out to be people in the slave trade. So how reliable was that information anyway? So that's just a small side note. So we're not always these beacons of reliable information, but we are regarded as that, and we should strive to be these beacons of reliable information and to remain relevant in this new dynamic context of dwindling trust in democracies, in governments, and so on. Government archives need to step up their game, and we need all the help we can get. So is that a new role for government archives? Yeah, maybe it is. But I think we should claim it because we're good at many things. We've had hundreds of years of experience of keeping records. Sure, we all knew that. But we have the know-how to manage records, and we can apply that know-how to the digital domain. We have the know-how to advise. We've been advising for years in ministries. They just don't listen because we don't have a position to do it. They're like, okay, thank, duly noted. Okay, moving on to whatever we were doing. But we also have the ability to enrich information and provide context, a very important thing of what we have always done as archives. So we should believe, we're good at many things. And I think we should, of course, this is not new to any of us in this room, but we should redefine ourselves. And it's never been so big and so urgent as now, because the trust of governments is in the balance. And I do believe that is something that we should take to heart. So at the National Archives in the Netherlands, we start not a new band, like a lot of people ask me, it's a new movement. And in 2026, when all that money comes to an end, we want to make a shift. National Archives, state archives, and by extension, many archives are often seen as these keepers of heritage. We often see on websites of state archives and national archives, we're the national memory. National memory of what? We only have a piece of the records. It's bullshit. So what we're doing is of course, we do have heritage, a lot of it. And a lot of it contributes to the national memory and defines who we are. But we're shifting that to becoming a center of expertise for information governance. That contributes to transparency and accountability of government. And that's a huge shift. Even the ministry that we're affiliated with, the Ministry of Culture, Education and Science, sometimes doesn't even look at us that way. They still think we're a heritage institution. But the potential that we can unlock is so much greater, and we're working on that very soon. So I'll quickly go through what that movement entails. And we wanted it to be super simple, so everyone working at the National Archive, all 450 people, could actually say it at the birthday party of their mother or son. First of all, if the Childcare Benefit Gate made one thing clear, is that we should also as archives, move closer to citizens. The public records need to go closer to citizens. It needs to be more citizen-centered. We shouldn't always listen to civil servants, ministers, ministries, because that's basically who we've been working for. But we're not working for them, we're working for citizens, society. As National Archives, we tend to be this big big towers that are untouchable, but we should move so much closer towards fellow archives. Also, I told you we have a system responsibility for archives in the Netherlands. That is something that, for example, my fellow director, the state archivist, is working on, because we are convinced that we are not the national memory. Public records information is everywhere. So we're just one little piece in that bigger puzzle that people need to be able to connect to find the information about them or about something that concerns them or something they're interested in. We should link our content. And then might be a bit of a contradiction, because we also need to move closer to governments. We need to work together to ensure the sustainable access of information to citizens. We need to help and convince them to keep their information accessible and close to citizens. So we are, in effect, their partners in transparency. So how I see our future context is, well, we take citizens as a starting point and not systems, ministries, or civil servants. We should protect the integrity of information in the present and thus guarantee that it continues to be reliable evidence of the past. That needs transparency activism, and it means that we need to become a center of expertise and not a heritage center. Because if data and information are the lubricants of modern day society, then all we see is an engine drowning in oil. So, let data and information that's drowning the engine. I mean, those are the things that we are good at. So if archives want to contribute to democracy, we need to empower accountability. And what I mean with that is accountability is very important to mend the damage that's done, to trust governments. People need to see why governments do things the way they do. We must find ways to keep data accessible in a context that's not only relevant to civil servants, but even more so relevant to citizens, journalists, researchers in general. So we need a paradigm shift from, the keeper of the old records and information to professionals. We need to become professionals who create the right conditions for decision makers to be able to be held accountable. Still with me? It's early, I know. I mean, that's what we're doing. We're creating, it's not sexy sometimes, but we're creating the right conditions in ministries, cabinets, so that they can be held accountable. If we don't feel that responsibility as archives, no one will. Because we have an all-encompassing view. And we don't work in just one ministry, we work for all of them, for all public records, not just ministries, but also local authorities, provinces, and so on. So we need to move up and forward as government archives. But before we do, this is quite commonsensical, of course, to move up and forward is easier said than done to achieve this. Because, we want it all, we want it now. We're used to Google. Archives are not Google. The government archives are built up by the Public Records Act. Also, politicians expect everything now. Citizens do. Huge problem, not new in this room. Huge problem for government archives, privacy versus access. The GDPR has become a very important standard to work with and is very limiting sometimes to achieve the goals that we do. So we need to start taking risks. Did a state archivist just say risk? Yes. Political pressure is definitely a big issue in government archives. Where is the information that we asked for? Members of parliament can ask for information at all times, and they should be. That's our legal duty. But where do we find it? Very often we don't find it, ministries don't find it. It's one big mess. For example, for the child care benefit gate, one of the members of parliament demanded that from when it came to light, he said, okay, all information about this should now be kept. We should keep all the information regarding that. So every ministry, every single department had to start collecting all the data from that specific. So, and all that information is now stored, but without any archival system. Information is not accessible, it's not searchable, and yeah, so what do you actually ask for? I mean, you ask for a measure that does not lead to the intention, and that is being able to reconstruct what happened in terms of policy development, policy execution. You kept all the information, but that's it. It's a pile of junk. But also environmental issues come into play. For example, when they ask us, okay, you have to store everything, ministries are held to certain environmental issues. I mean, as we heard, climate change is a huge, huge challenge and task that we all have to face. So we have to reduce our carbon, getting really excited here. We should reduce our carbon emissions, but by stating that we should keep all records and information, that's not going to help us. So these are things that we have to deal with, and this all comes from political pressure. And last but not least, the organizational struggles. I mean, if we as government archives want to become these centers of expertise for information governance, let's face it, a lot of people who came to work at National Archives were archivists, were librarians, and they never chose to become transparency activists. A lot of them are happy about it, but others are like, hell no, I mean, I came here to work with old maps. And we can't blame them, because that's what happens. That's part of your collection, and people should still work with maps. But it's something that it requires a lot of things. So what we have to do, what we started doing is like make people believe that we actually have the right skills and the knowledge to make a change. That even coming from a heritage institution, you have actually developed the necessary skills. But all these challenges, it shouldn't stop us. I mean, the risk is too great if we do not act. So we need to step up as government archives. And 10 years ago, the National Archives of the Netherlands, in fact, coined the term archiving by design. And it's coined by the Netherlands 10 years ago. It's garnered much attention abroad, and for example in Norway it's already implemented, much better than in the Netherlands, I must admit. And the European Archives Group even started a subgroup, Archiving by Design, this year. So this is something that we're very proud of. The definition is basically very simple. During the design or adjustment of information systems, the appropriate measures are taken to ensure that the information becomes and stays sustainably accessible. It's this year been embraced as one of the new principles of European information governance. And that's something that we're very that we're very happy with. And those appropriate measures, mind you, this is not just about metadata. This is also being the systems that civil servants, people at tax offices work with. So it's not the systems that we work with, it's the systems that authorities work with. And the appropriate measures shouldn't be confined to just metadata about provenance or preservation. The appropriate measures should also be about embracing values that are important in modern digital societies and make sure that these values can be upheld in an information system and the exchange of data between them. Because as I said in an earlier stage, it's garbage in, garbage out. And it's just not, putting in the right metadata might be right, as happened in the example that I first gave you. But it was designed on all the wrong principles. So, and all the wrong values. So this is something that we need to take into account. So what values are we talking about? Well, easy, transparency. As government archives, we should think long and hard, together with ministries, government agencies, about what information we need to be transparent about. Because transparency very often is confounded with publishing everything, making everything accessible to everyone. No, transparency is also about being able to explain why certain information can be destroyed, has to be destroyed, or cannot be made accessible. That's also transparency. If you can't explain that, you're not transparent. So transparency is more complex than publication. Accountability, as I said, transparency in information management will lead to improved accountability, but having decided which documents to keep is not going to help you with accountability. You need to create a structure and link up data and information in such a way that it's possible to reiterate decision-making processes and explain, for example, why did we choose policy A and not policy B? Because you're always going to do wrong or right to a certain group in society, but you need to be able to explain it as a government. If you don't, or you're not transparent about it, it just seems like you're just making shady deals in the ministries. So that means that government archives need to be much more aware of decision-making processes in this complex world. Another very important value is the accessibility and ownership. Well, of course, what do we destroy? What do we keep in a future-proof way? Also, it needs to be understandable. Has anyone read a lot of documents from public records, from ministries? They're awful. I mean, you need to be a genius to even understand what they're saying. And so if you're going to be citizen-centered and you use that language, which citizens are you going to connect with? The 5% university, educated people in this room? Yes, maybe, probably. But many others, no. So accessibility is more than just choosing the right method, it's also choosing the right language. But it also means that you have to think of, okay, are we creating data documents that citizens should have ownership of? That's the problem. We don't have ownership. The government has more data on you than all the big techs together. That's something that we're not very easily aware. We're always like, oh, big tech, scary, woo. No, the government is scary, especially if you look in their information systems, and they have a lot more information about you than all the big techs, because they know what they're doing. The government's not always. And they have a lot of information. So you need to start thinking, what information should we be able to access about ourselves, or even delete? Big word. Of course, we're not going to be able to delete our, we have the right to be forgotten online. But is there such a thing for governments? Once you're in, you never get out? Is that what we should be? It is obvious that archiving by design, poses great pressure on organizations. I mean, I told you before, it's the information chain from when a public record is created to the moment it comes into the archive is, at the end of the information chain where the archive was traditionally based at, it's very quiet. You get someone who wants to find a record of a family member, you find someone, a journalist who wants to write an article about 50 years of X, Y, and Z. People are friendly, it's lovely. I mean, no one's really... Sometimes you do get lawyers who need, evidence for courts, and then it gets a little bit more exciting, but it's not... there's no pressure. But if we want to archive by design and actually have our say in what systems should do, how they should be designed, what values should be taken into account, and if we want to have a say as an archive in that, it's a whole different game. Because at the beginning of the information chain, it's very busy. There's not just a few people who are interested in what you're doing. There's lots of people. You have privacy officers. You have civil servants who need it now and who never want to change working the way they ever did. You have privacy officers, you have data architects, you have security specialists because, Russia's always there. It's something that it's so busy, and suddenly the archivist finds himself or herself in the middle of that group of people and has to make count what they say. It's pretty difficult. A lot of people didn't choose for that. So it's definitely adding a lot of pressure to the organization, to the people who need to make that shift, to need to actually act upon the archiving by design. And to add to all these pressures, information is the only resource that grows while using, if you think of it. And information from governments is used all the time. I mean, all the time. If you think of it, your license plate is used when you get a fine, when you get snapped, when your photo is taken, you get a fine. It's used, it's processed, it gets shifted around. Mails, documents, policy making, people alter it, they forward it, they change it, they use it in different perspectives, they put it in algorithms. I mean, information is used in so many ways that information government is no longer just about documents and perhaps even databases, but it's also about emails, chat, algorithms. And so that brings me to this conference: embrace the algorithm. You know, in a world of exploding information and digital transformation, the record management and archive community will need to embrace algorithms and artificial intelligence. We do not only need them to identify, reshape, and redescribe all legally, administratively, and historically valuable information in hindsight, but we also need them to make sense of the avalanche of information being produced by governments nowadays. And as I said, we're not just talking documents and PDFs, which is something that I heard a lot. State archives are the PDF masters. We're much more than that by now, I can tell you. And if we want to do archiving by design, we're going to have to embrace these algorithms. We're not going to make the algorithms of archives, but we're going to sit next to the ministries who are making algorithms to do whatever job they have to do. But we need to feed them with the right values. You know, you remember these values like transparency, accessibility, accountability that I've mentioned? These are things that we can actually contribute to. It's a whole new playing field for us. But for example, just to give you an example of where the right values were not fed into the algorithm, this is a file of one of those people who got basically duped at the childcare. And she got her personal file after years. The algorithm had erased, I don't know, God knows on which variables, but I think there was some GDPR and other, but the value here was definitely not transparency. I mean, no. This is ridiculous. So this became, of course, it was in newspapers all over, because how can we give this to people? Ridiculous. I'll skip this. So we've come to a point where, you know, computers saying no is just no longer an option. I mean, that's not what we can do. That's not what we should do. And, you know, if we are going to archive by design, information professionals working in archives will progressively be involved in feeding the design of algorithms with the values that we hold so dear. That is something that I'm personally convinced of, and it's something that I'm seeing already in the Netherlands. I got a compliment the other day from someone from the Ministry of Healthcare saying that, wow, we've never seen people from the National Archive ever, and in the last year they've been all over the place. Where did you get all these people? Like, they're not new. They're just doing things differently. So that was a huge compliment. But, you know, before we start feeding values to algorithms, you know, nice philosophical approach, far-fetched, we first did what we're good at, and that is archiving and publishing algorithms. So we started off participating in the algorithm register by the Ministry of Internal Affairs, and this is a slide in Dutch just to document it. So this is just a little illustration of all the goals that the algorithm register should have. And it was an initiative by the Minister of Internal Affairs. The register was started. And of course, a lot of people are still a little bit in doubt of if that's going to help. And it's true, there's not a lot of algorithms in there yet, but the intention is good. You know, it's like putting out there what variables, what data do we use to define certain things. The exciting or important algorithms such as text collection, fraud, fighting fraud, you can't find them there yet. Because it's not obligatory, it's not compulsory yet to submit them. But what you can find, for example, is how many birds can fly over a certain area in the city of Utrecht before something needs to be done. Not really useful yet, but we're getting there. I mean, it's one step at a time, and it only started in the beginning of the year. So this brings me to a little bit more of a philosophical sort of part of the keynote. Because to show you what we're facing with. I mean, these are all constructs that if I ask every single one of you in this room, what do you mean by that? What's the definition? We will get a lot of different definitions. They're quite difficult. Now we've entered the digital age, blah, blah, blah. We've had this conversation for years. And suddenly we have all these snazzy adjectives being added. You can actually, you can even use a few on different lines. It doesn't matter. You can connect different dots. We already had difficulty defining that. With those coming into play, it's even become more difficult. And then another one, very difficult. Wow. Democracy. 10,000s of definitions. And then you add digital in front. Well, good luck. I can tell you now, digital democracy is one concept, but there is more than 220 scholarly conceptions of what it is and what it should entail. So what this shows is that we've come in a conceptual vacuum as societies. A cyber community is a sort of community, it's a sort of friendship, a sort of property. I mean, we can't define concepts very well in a digital time and age. You see, there's so many concepts, so many conceptions of what it is and what it should be. So if we can't even define our concepts in a digital democracy, how are we going to define policies? So next to a conceptual vacuum, we've also entered a policy vacuum. And by extension, a design vacuum. Because if we want to build algorithms, systems that contribute to democracy, what are we going to base it on? So how do we make democratic values bear upon complex digital technologies? This is a huge question that archives are not, even if we do archiving by design, we're not going to answer that. And I'm going to quote by this a friendly gentleman here, Paul Niemitz. He's a principal advisor in the European Commission, who said something very wise on AIs and algorithms and what we were faced with. In order to protect and strengthen democracies in the age of AI and the core Trinitarian idea of human rights, rule of law, and democracy, we need a new culture of technology and business development, which we call human rights, rule of law, and democracy by design. Because to fill that design vacuum, that conceptual vacuum, we will need to embrace democracy by design. So, empowering others to be accountable as archives. We don't just do that by archiving by design, as I said, but also by democracy by design. Wow, it's become even more pretentious. So now I'm saying archives can play a role in democracy by design. Yes, I agree. This is an exercise from an ethical course. On one is a child, the other are 5 adults. What should the operator do? And it's quiet. And I understand, because we're modern people. We don't think that way. We think, no, this constructor, I mean, this operator should never be in that position. This is what accountability is about. He should never be in that position. This is simply bad to design. So, how do we move from design vacuum and bad designs to a brighter future? World peace. Well, let's start first with, as this drawing illustrates, that there's not only a concept and policy vacuum, but also a design vacuum. And democracy by design is something that multiple parties, including archives, will have to work on together, strengthened by flexible policies and supportive governments. That's quite a lot of conditions. And to find the role of archives in this democracy by design process is going to be a long and bumpy road. But one thing is for sure, I believe that information governance is not just a means to an end, but can actually be a transformative energy in this challenge that we face as society. And as archives, we have the moral obligation to play our part in that transformation with all the knowledge and skills that we can bring to the table. And we're only at the very start of that journey as government archives. There are some things that we can do, and that's something that I want to give you to end this conversation with, because I do think we can bring a lot to the table in this whole democracy by design playing field as archives. We have so much more to bring to the table than we actually believe. But let's start by, information is valuable. No one better than we do as archives, I'm not just talking government archives, also you guys, know that information is valuable. So why don't we start treating, and that's something that we have done as the National Archives, treating today's information that often seems, boring, meaningless, treat like it's the heritage of tomorrow that will actually contribute to important conversations that we're having as societies. Is that over the top? I think as audiovisual archives, you're already doing a pretty good job at that. State archives don't. You're on top of the news, something that we don't. Just to give you an example, like the colonial archives I mentioned earlier, the slave trade was documented in such a meticulous way that it's awful to say, but I have to compliment the people who actually made these documents. They have incredible rich information, but they were made for all the wrong reasons. And if that information hadn't been kept the way it was done now, and if the National Archives hadn't digitized it, hadn't enriched it with algorithms, AI, to make it searchable, we would not have had the apologies by the Prime Minister for our colonial past as soon as we had now. Last year in December, the Prime Minister apologized to all the former Dutch colonies for their huge role in the slave trade. Those apologies were made at the National Archives, not in some fancy conference center, at the National Archives. And that's something that we should be aware of. We convinced them to say, look, this is where you should be doing it, because if this hadn't been kept, we couldn't have contributed to this important debate in society. And that's a very important example from a long time ago. But take the COVID archives. I call them the COVID archives. As a National Archives, we mentioned, okay, when this happened, we knew this is going to be big. So what we did is we created a hotspot. It's a Dutch thing. And basically, we asked all ministries to tag, label, gather content in a similar way, so that we could at least at one stage connect the dots much faster, because we knew that this was going to be big. The repercussions of this were going to be huge. So we identified that in advance. And as an archive, as a tiny little archive in between 130,000 civil servants with 450 people, we managed to create a hotspot for all this information. These are just, and thinking of this room, think of what we could do together. I know that what I've told is by no means a new story. And a lot of insights you already had, heard, maybe somewhere. But the reason why I decided to tell it today is because it bears repeating. And I think not only government archives who are at the forefront of policy making, politics, and so on, can contribute, but also audiovisual archives. And that's why the archives in the Netherlands and the newsrooms can actually, that it's an incredible resource that we haven't even tapped into. What we do, we work together sometimes on historical projects, linking dots from the past. But when it comes to present information, you guys have so much current information that doesn't get to the National Archives or the State Archives for much later. But how great would it be that if we can use the language of journalism that is able to break down very complex topics to an approachable, bite-sized snack for citizens, and we could link those documents, the public records that we keep that are often so illegible and difficult, if we can connect those dots at a very early stage, how beautiful would that be? So if this is not going to convince you to keep on working in archives, I don't know. So I urge you, let's design democracy together, not just government archives, but all archives. And I think we should team up. So I'm looking at my colleagues of Sound and Vision to have a talk after this and how we can make this happen. And not connecting dots from the past, I'm talking what's happening right now. You're on top of a lot of information about things that are happening right now. That goes directly into your archives. We're not really doing anything to contribute to societal debate and so on. I think we should do that. And if you work in a country where the state archives or the national archives or whatever they're called are not quite as digital or as advanced, take the slides and convince them that they can actually do more than what they're doing now. And if that doesn't work, you can always invite me to talk to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom de Smet. Please stay on stage. We do have a few minutes.
Okay.
Do you have any question, any comments? We do have, I would say, 10 minutes maybe for your questions and comments. So who is the icebreaker in the all?
Coffee break? Okay.
Hi, I'm also from the Netherlands. I know about the things you talked about. Thank you very much for a lovely presentation. My question is, you receive documents within 10 or 20 years in most cases. Would you like to have that sped up?
Definitely. We are now talking to several ministries to actually bring documents to the archives immediately after creation. So much like media management that has been existing in audiovisual archives, which is a big thing because, of course, the ownership transfers if you do that. So as long as it's not in the archives, it's the owner is the minister of whichever ministry or cabinet they are working for, or the information is created by. The moment it comes to the archive, the Minister of Culture becomes responsible for that information. And sometimes they're not willing to because the information can still be used, is still used in policies and so on, or has privacy data that we can't handle as the Ministry of Culture. So there's still some legal barriers to speed that process up. But what we can do is think about the shape of documents, which metadata, what should be put forward, to which platforms documents should actually be able, which platforms they should be able to communicate with to publish things. Even if they're not publishing it now, they might do in the future. So it's a combination of things. So the archiving by design is actually thinking proactively on where will this information be put, who can see it, who needs to have access to it. And we are also talking to ministries, to the Ministry of Culture to change the public records law to actually make that possible. And there seems to be quite a bit of support for that.
There was another question there. No? Same row.
Hi, I'm Louise from Denmark, from the Danish national broadcaster. I would like to ask you how we can avoid that the truth of Trump is going into our archives and hiding the real truth, because that's what I'm worried about, that our archives will be more and more sandy, and it will be very difficult for us to find the truth in the archives.
Yeah, exactly. And this is something that it's funny because I asked a similar question to the state archivists of the United States at the time when Trump was there. So they also act upon the Public Records Act. They're also the ones who told, like, look, we can't find certain records. They turned out to be in Florida. And that's also the fact. And he says like, yeah, but we only have those records. So whatever was said and done, that's what it says. And that's where we miss the context that is so much debated about. So when I say, like, we as you in the archives, I think if you look at the public broadcast archives in the US, they have a lot more context about what's being said, the debates that that people had about certain policies, about certain things that he said. Those are not things that end up in the state archives in the USA. But they're also not linked to that content that could actually provide context about, okay, this wasn't a black on white fact. It was something that was heavily disputed in society. It was something that was debated about, and that was eventually turned out not to be true. So that you need to link it to maybe scientific publications that were later issued in the past. And those dots, we as government archives, we aren't connecting them yet. And I think when I talk about democracy by design and being able to, contribute to that debate, wider debate, we need to connect those dots. So no, we can't prevent bullshit from coming into our archives, but we can provide more context.
Thank you. There is a question here, the first row.
Thank you, Tom, for your presentation. I found it very intriguing, and I have a question, I think, and some reflections. You've kept using the term information, and as you've rightly pointed out, information may or may not be reliable. The true value of information is not to be taken for granted. I very much liked your value-centered approach and also your people-centered approach. And I wonder whether among the values that you've mentioned, maybe accessibility or transparency, there is something in there where perhaps we can move from information to understanding. And I'm thinking here, to give an example, of the particular case of people from former colonies in the Netherlands. And there is the book, you may be familiar with it, by Gloria Wekker, called White Innocence, where she says there is still a lot of racist attitudes, thoughts, and so on in the current Dutch society. So if I look at the materials at Sound and Vision or at the National Library about former colonies, all that, yes, we could look at it as data, as information. We can question, we can become self-reflexive about what it tells us about the past. But how do we move from these pieces of information to understanding the past of these people and also their present in Dutch society, and who should be forging that kind of understanding? Is it historians? Is it archivists? Because sometimes that understanding, the sum of different parts that we call information, doesn't add up to form that whole picture understanding. So I wonder what are your thoughts about that?
It's an extremely interesting question. I think we can have another keynote about, because it's very complex what you touch upon. One thing I say is that what you actually want, that understanding, I think that's part of what I'm also mean by democracy by design, because I think you were talking about some fundamental debates in society that actually causing polarization within societies, so hence they are destructive. And by creating understanding, you hope to counteract that. So that's what something, but of course we only have bits of information, and as I said, the role of archives what it should be in that complex process of democracy by design, yes, information is important to create understanding, but it's not the only thing there is. For example, in your example, the people from former colonies in the Netherlands regard the National Archives as an archive run by white people with information designed by the oppressor. And that's true. So we're never going to be a credible source to create that understanding. What you see is that you see a lot more, we are trying to organize a lot more societal groups around us to actually have that debate with us, but especially among each other, with the information that we can provide, not just the archive, but also, as you said, scientific researchers, historians, and so on. And that's something important that we need to contribute. So we shouldn't just think about it as information, but how can we contribute to a specific societal debate? And I think the one on colonialism is a very big and urgent one in the Netherlands.
I found what you just said about the National Library. It's an archive made by white people, and people from former colonies regarded as the oppressor, archives of the oppressor. That's credible. So I think this kind of self-reflexivity on the part of the archives, perhaps indeed, that does play a role in leading to credible debates and discussions in society among different.
Yeah, I mean,
parties.
To contribute to credibility, we need to be credible ourselves.
Thank you. Is there one more question from the audience? I don't think so. Oh,
Coffee.
Thank you very much indeed, Tom.
Thank
you
you
for a brilliant and interesting keynote. Thank you so much.